There are of course many different kinds of Simpsons episodes. The Halloween specials, which try to scare us with their spooky stories, the flashback episodes, which treat us to the sweet nectar known as lore, and the future set episodes, which amaze us with their predictions that are 100% accurate. But one type stands out, both for its diversity and its educational value. After all, what could be more exciting than exploring foreign and different cultures? That's something only the travel episodes allow us to do. A welcome change of scenery for The Simpsons, as well as a nice nod to fans from the respective distant country. But if you look a little closer, references to other countries keep creeping in. In this section, we'll compile all these clues and perhaps gain deeper insights into the Simpsons universe and the writers' minds. So, pack your bags, because the taxi, /the train, /the plane is already waiting. Next stop. Do you come from a land down under? But we still have a few hours before the flight leaves, so we can linger a little longer in Springfield. Let's make the most of the time and go to the cinema. Fittingly, Space Mutants 5, The Land Down Under. One of the best films in the series, in my opinion. And just like in pretty much every horror movie we see on The Simpsons, it features a couple sitting in a car making love. You can easily tell we are in Australia because the man has a strong accent. And then the mutant shows up and eats everyone. Interestingly, it carries a child in a pouch on its belly, just like a kangaroo. Whether all space mutants have this feature or whether they adapt to the cultures of their respective countries is a topic for another podcast. In the Bobo episode, arguably the only Simpsons episode to contain a Citizen Kane reference, Smithers gets everyone in Australia to spell out Mr. Burns' name with candles in celebration of his birthday. Mr. Burns is unimpressed and doesn't even bother to look at it. Why Australia of all places? Well, the scene is a reference to a real-life event. When the people of Perth left all their lights on so they could be seen by astronaut John Glenn, who was in Earth's orbit. Why Perth did that, of all places, isn't entirely clear to me, because John Glenn wasn't from Perth, he was in fact American. But in any case, that's what earned the city the nickname City of Lights. But I won't keep up in suspense any longer, because we all know there's only one true Australia episode. Season 6, episode 16. Bart versus Spain. Of course it's against Australia. You little naive souls. Here, of course, we have to dig a little deeper. Because unlike the other two appearances so far, this is a bona fide travel episode. And with that comes a bombardment of references. And not only that, it's actually the very first travel episode. But let's start from the beginning. Bart learns about the Coriolis effect, which states that water swirls in the opposite direction in the northern hemisphere than in the southern hemisphere. He then calls a few countries in the southern hemisphere to find out which way the toilet flush spins there. And sure enough, they spin the other way, namely counterclockwise. A quick aside, that's bullshit. The Coriolis effect does actually exist, but it applies more to massive wind or water masses, like ocean eddies or hurricanes. So please don't try this at home, you'll probably be disappointed. But back to the topic at hand. Because of Bart's patents, a family in Australia receives a massive phone bill and they complain. The episode starts off by poking fun at Australians in pretty general way. In addition to the stereotypical accent, the family naturally lives in the middle of the outback, hours away from the nearest houses. Coincidentally, all the important politicians live right there too. So, the father, whose name is Bruno by the way, wants to confront Bart over the phone. Bart just makes fun of him and says he hears that Bruno's baby is currently being eaten by a dingo. Not only is this a reference to Australia's dangerous wildlife and the dingo itself, but also to a real-life event, the disappearance of Azaria Chamberlain. I'll spare you the details here, you can surely figure out for yourself. The whole thing takes on international significance when the Prime Minister gets involved. As a result, the Simpsons receive a visit from the State Department, which shows them a whole bunch of Dias. Do you remember Dias? It was a different time. Anyway, they're briefed on the US craze for Australia, which then came to an abrupt end, straining relations between the two countries. And this craze really did exist in the 80s. Featured are Paul Hogan from the Crocodile Dundee movies, Koala Blue, a chain of stores selling Australian goods, football player Jack Jackson, Vegemite, which seems to be some kind of spread, and last but not least, director Yahoo series, whose films Americans never really seem to get. I really don't know what their problem is. The poster for Einstein Jr. looks fantastic. Anyway, Bart is now supposed to apologize for the Australian people, and so the Simpsons are finally flying to Australia. The sheer force of koalas and kangaroos is almost too much to handle. After the Simpsons make a statement at the American embassy, they head to the generically named cultural center where they learn that all Australians are thieves. The first Prime Minister even seems to have been an ancestor of Snake. Then they head to the pub, and aside from another hilarious Crocodile Dundee reference, we learn that all Australians not just thieves but also drunkards, because the bartender seems to know no other drink besides beer. And then it's time for the apology. Meanwhile, Lisa and Marge continue exploring. Lisa would love to see the Woolloomooloo dirt monument, which unfortunately doesn't seem to exist. The closest thing to it is a Sydney neighborhood called Woolloomooloo. What a country. But unfortunately there was a slight change of plans. After Bart apologizes, he's supposed to get a kick in the butt with an extremely oversized boot. The person carrying out this kick is possibly one of the most mysterious Simpsons characters of all time. He's known only as the booting agent and definitely looks like a reference to something, with his leather jacket and spindly legs. But I simply can't find anything about him. The kick itself is apparently meant to be some kind of reference to that American teenager Michael Fay, but that happened in Singapore, not Australia. And it wasn't kicks, but canning. So that seems pretty far-fetched to me, which is probably why I don't work for Simpsons Wiki. What follows is a chase scene full of boomerangs, kangaroos and didgeridoos, the latter played masterfully by Lisa Simpson. Among the angry mob, there's also a Mad Max-like figure, a movie set in this dystopian version of Australia. Later, the Simpsons escape, leaving us behind in a wave of bullfrogs while they themselves board a koala. And that's it. The Simpson family's great Australian adventure. But that doesn't mean this beautiful country has nothing more to offer us. Australia doesn't appear in the episode Das Bus. And don't let Simpsons Wiki tell you otherwise. That's how they trick you. It might seem obvious that Australia is a member of the UNO Club, but that's not the case. At least not in this episode. Later on, it does become a member, with none other than Database as its representative. But Simpsons Wiki won't hear of that episode either. But rants aside, we don't have to wait too long, just until season 10 episode 7, Lisa gets an A. In this episode, Lisa becomes addicted to one of Bart's video games, namely Dash Dingo. Obviously a reference to the classic Crash Bandicoot. This game is also extremely cliché-ridden, starting with the dingo itself. The villain is the floating head of an Australian with a thick accent who says he must find and devour the 7 crystal babies. This is yet another allusion to Azaria Chamberlain. The writers apparently found the whole situation amusing enough to include 2 references. If Dash fails, he'll have to stay in the deep didgeridoo forever, which is basically the dingo equivalent of hell. His opponents are all kinds of Australian animals, some of whom wield nunchucks, though that probably belongs in the Japan video. The game world is called Down Underverse. That's really all the lore you can glean from it. We are all familiar with the highlights of events in Springfield. Stick Day, the Bouncy Ball Festival and last but not least the Springfield Marathon. And this run attracts international guests too. In season 12, episode 14, the Ivan et Nioch episode, these guests come from Djibouti, which we couldn't care less about, and of course from Australia. Our Australian friend, whose appearance is hardly need to describe further, almost wins, but is outmaneuvered at the last moment by Bart, who joins the race in the final meters and pretends to be Italian. When an angry mob naturally forms as a result, the Australian pulls out a certain bow-shaped stick. I'd bet it comes back if you throw it. There's a nice reference in season 20 episode 2 where Bart has some actor's cell phone. I could name him here. It wouldn't even be any work since I have his name in my head anyway. But I want to express my indifference to the whole thing by not doing it anyway. Anyway, he uses that guy's cell phone to make prank calls. And since he learned absolutely nothing from the whole boot thing, one of those calls ends up in Australia. Naturally, a bar called Crocodile Trunkies. To make up for this joke, however, we have two fantastic references to the original Australia episode. First, the guy with the very large spoon is sitting at a bar, unfortunately not the one with the boot. And second, hanging on the wall between boomerangs and koala heads is the traditional flag with the boot. Unfortunately, huge ass couldn't be found here either, after having cost Mo so many headaches. In season 21, episode 13, the color yellow, we have only one quote, but it's a relatively iconic one. Here we learn that the Simpson family was so bad that they were even kicked out of Australia. We are now venturing into realms that are almost as desolate and dangerous as the Australian outback. The new Simpsons seasons. For example, there's a brief reference in season 23, episode 10, Politically Inept, with Homer Simpson. Here, a monologue by Homer goes viral because a flight is delayed. And who's to blame as usual? The Australians. Because apparently one of these criminals has escaped from prison in New South Wales. And the joke is that this has nothing to do with the Simpsons flight. But maybe the Simpsons actually live in Australia? Ever thought about that? But then comes the point in the research where you realize the video was worth it. The video Homer Simpson vs. Sydney Opera House. This masterpiece was a promotional video for the 2016 Graphic Arts Festival, which took place at the Sydney Opera House. Unfortunately, there's not much to be found out about the festival itself, except that Neil Gaiman apparently thought it was pretty awesome and that Matt Groening was there as a special guest. The video is just over a minute long and shows Homer in front of the opera house, with the Sydney Harbour Bridge in the background. He talks about how great Sydney is, among other things, because Russell Crowe shows up and because they almost speak English. He also thanks Australia for Wolverine and Harley Quinn, though I hope he's referring to the actors, because who, pray tell, doesn't know that Wolverine is Canadian? Then there's a joke about Rupert Murdoch, the CEO of Fox. The good old Fox jokes. Of course, Crocodile Dundee can't be left out either. Then a friendly seal, or sea lion, I have no idea, comes along to help Homer chase away the seagulls. Then they clap together for Matt Groening. In season 26, episode 7, there's another little reference. Bart and Milhouse are talking about the Hobbit movies, and Milhouse is promoting New Zealand. Then a URL pops up with the tagline, New Zealand, the Milhouse of Australia. You know what that means. See you again in a New Zealand video. But first, we've got a few more things on our list. Season 27, episode 20, To Career with Love, actually belongs in a different video, namely the one about France. And even the two nasty Frenchmen from the very first season are making a comeback. Marge wants this vacation to finally go well and proceeds to list all, or at least some, of the trips that went wrong. And the first one mentioned, or the GOAT as the kids say, is the trip to the country down under. Next come Brazil, Japan, London and China. The World's Fair, which only Bart attended, but which also had something to do with careers, and the place with the underground jockeys, which I fear doesn't really exist at all. Then there's Itchy and Scratchy Land and outer space. A trip that really had absolutely nothing to do with anyone but Homer. But hey, we don't want to be picky and get hung up on the fact that there were so many bad examples. Italy, for instance. Do you remember back when Cecil Terwilliger threatened to throw Bart off a dam? And do you also remember when many seasons later Bart fell from an even higher dam and didn't suffer a single injury? Yes, that moment happened in season 30, episode 1. For some reason, the whole thing gets turned into a movie and posters are made for different countries. One for China, where Bart looks suspiciously like the version from the Tracy Ullman show. Then there's the poster of the moment titled Hello from Up Over. If you think the Australia references are getting better compared to the overall quality of the episodes, then there's your answer. And then there's one more for the younger audience. Are they planning to release the same movie in the same country under two different titles? I have a lot of questions. And those are all the notable Australia references in The Simpsons, at least so far. If you know of any other references, feel free to send them our way. Maybe it will be enough for a follow-up. I'm sure Arnie Pie's Australian cousin will show up in some video or another. As for me, I'm going to head outside, hunt a kangaroo with my boomerang, and then watch the Crocodile Dundee trilogy in the extended edition. See you on the next trip.